Shalom, my friends. Welcome to this week's Word Study. Entering into His rest is what we're going to talk about. But first, I got a wonderful gift in the mail from Johnny. He made me some seat, and he's got blue, purple, and white. The white is for the Kodashim, the blue is for Yeshua, and the purple represents Yeshua's being our Kohen Hagadol, our high priest. Anyway, thank you very much, Johnny. I will wear these in memory of you and your wonderful gift. Hallelujah. So, we're going to talk today about entering into Elohim's rest. At the close of my newscast just 2 days ago, I talked about, people have been, talking about the coming tribulation and all the violence going on in the Middle East and all the crazy things going on throughout the world. And some people are saying, I'm scared. And I admonished those people by saying, you don't have to feel that way if you have a relationship with Elohim and that you're trusting Him, knowing that if you are making Him number one on a list of one in your life, then you can trust Him because He never lets His children down. Now, when I say that, it doesn't mean that He's never going to do anything that you don't want Him to do. Yeshua said, as long as you're in this world, you will face trials and tribulations. That's not talking about the tribulation. He says, you're going to experience things and, you'll have troubles, but be of good cheer because Yeshua said, I have overcome the world. Now, we will face trials, tribulations, we will have troubles. But Elohim will see you through them successfully. So, when I say that, He never lets His children down, that doesn't mean that He does what we want Him to do. He does what's best for us. And, these sufferings, trials, tribulations, troubles, the Word says that they build character in us. So, if things aren't going the way that you want them to, just know that, Elohim is building character in you, and He won't let you down. It's not going to defeat you. Many, many years ago, I think I was in my later 20s, and troubles come up, and I thought, what am I complaining about? I mean, every day of my life, I've gone through, I'm fine, I'm not dead, it didn't kill me, nothing has ever defeated me, nothing has ever destroyed me. I always found a way through my troubles. And, by the way, this was a revelation, from Abba. My troubles, they're mine. And I embrace them because they're my troubles. I have the tools. Elohim has given me the tools to work through my problems. You think you have problems? Try trading your problems with someone else. Take their problems on. And you don't have the tools for those. You want to have a real nightmare, there's that. So, if you have problems, recognize the fact they are yours. And Elohim has given you the tools to work through them so that you can grow in character, and He will not let you down. You will not be defeated. So, now, my beloved Binti, my darling daughter, Michelle, we had a conversation yesterday, and we were talking about entering the rest of Elohim, and what does that mean? We read in Hebrews chapter 3, verse 15, it says, "While it is still called today, if you hear His voice, do not harden your hearts as they did," meaning talking about the Jews in the desert, in the Exodus. Then in verse 19, chapter 3, we read, the Jews in the desert were not able to enter into His rest because of their unwillingness to trust in and rely on Elohim. Their unbelief had shut them out. They were unable to enter into His rest because they were unwilling to trust Him, to rely on Him. And this is what I was talking about in the close of my newscast, and just before, in the beginning of this video. We have trials and tribulations that we have to face. They build character in us, and we have to be willing to trust Elohim, rely on Him. When we go through trials, tribulations, problems, we sit down, we have a meeting with Abba Father. Talk to Him. Abba, this is going on. These are my concerns. I come before you, Father, to ask for your counsel. Guide me, direct me, show me the way through this. You talk to Him. This is how we pitch our tent with Elohim. You talk to Him about everything. You seek His guidance, and you trust Him. This is how we enter His rest, by trusting Him. Matthew, chapter 11, verse 28, Yeshua says, "Come to me, all you who labor, who are heavy laden and overburdened, and I will give you rest." Hebrews, Ivrim, chapter 4, verses 1 through 7. Let's look at this. It reads, "Therefore," meaning, everything we talked about in chapter 3. I'm not covering that. But therefore is talking about the things of chapter 3, basically the Hebrews in the desert, and they didn't enter His rest because they were unwilling to trust Elohim. Therefore, verse 1, while the promise of entering His rest still holds and is offered today, let us be very careful that we do not distrust that promise, lest any of you should think he has come too late and has come short of reaching it. Anybody who thinks, "Oh, I'm too late and I'm not worthy," none of us are worthy, but anybody who thinks they can't enter His rest for various reasons, bad way to go. It's being offered us today. And we are told, be very careful that you do not distrust this promise. We can enter His rest. In other words, Elohim makes it possible for us to enter his rest. And as we go forth, I'm going to explain what rest is. It's we all want it. It's a beautiful thing. But we do well to make sure that we accept his offer. If we do not keep our faith in him, which is the main exhortation of the book of Hebrews, that is to say, if we do not continue to grow in and wash ourselves in his word, we will fail to enter into his rest. It's also important to note that entering into the rest of Elohim, being spoken of here in the book of Hebrews, is not the same rest that was being spoken of concerning the rest of entering the land of Canaan, which the first generation of Israelites failed to attain, or the rest which was available in Psalm 95 when David spoke of it. Here in Hebrews, entering into Elohim's rest is something different than the rest spoken of in the first covenant. This rest is something that is now being made available to us because of the work achieved by Yahshua. Verse 2 reads, "For indeed we have had the good news of Elohim proclaimed to us, just as truly as they, the Israelites of old, did. But the message they heard did not benefit them because it was not mixed with faith." That is, it was not mixed with growing in and being washed by his word. It was not mixed with the leaning of one's entire personality on Elohim in absolute trust and confidence in his power, his wisdom, his goodness by those who heard it. Verse 3, "For we who have believed, trusted in and relied on Elohim, do enter into his rest in accordance with his declaration that those who did not believe should not enter, when he said, 'As I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest.'" That's referring to Psalm 95, verse 11. "And this he said, although his works had been completed, had been prepared, and were waiting for all who would believe from the foundation of the world." That, speaking of Bereshith, Genesis. On the seventh day he rested. Verse 4, "For in a certain place he has said this about the seventh day, and Elohim rested on the seventh day from all his works." Again, looking back at Bereshith, Genesis. Verse 5, "And they forfeited their part in it, for in this passage he said, 'They shall not enter my rest.'" Again, referring to Psalms. Verse 6, "Seeing then that the promise remains over from past times for some to enter into that rest, and that those who formerly were given the good news about it and the opportunity failed to appropriate it and did not enter because of disobedience." Verse 7, "He again sets a definite day, that is a new today, and gives another opportunity of securing his rest, saying through David after so long a time in the words already quoted, 'Today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts.'" Again, referring to Psalm 95, verse 11. Verse 8, "This mention of a rest was not a reference to their entering into Canaan, because if Joshua Yehoshua, had given them rest, Elohim would not speak about another day after that. Verse 9. So then, there is still awaiting a full and complete Sabbath rest reserved for the true people of Elohim. In other words, since people did not enter Elohim's rest in Moses' day, Moshe, nor in Joshua's day, Yehoshua, and yet we are still exhorted in the Psalms about Elohim's rest, Psalm 95. The conclusion is that this rest still remains available for those who love Elohim. Now, why does he call this a Sabbath rest? He is not slipping in a command about the seventh day Shabbat. That would be totally out of context. His exhortation throughout the book of Hebrews is telling Jewish people to look to Yeshua. He is not urging them to do a better job of keeping Jewish customs. The ancient Israelites who had the Sabbath did not enter the rest he's talking about. Elohim's rest is entered by faith, by believing the good news, and by pitching our tent with him. The Ruach here is not interested in a particular day of the week. He is concerned about how people respond to Yeshua. A person who keeps the weekly Shabbat, Sabbath, but rejects Yeshua has not entered Elohim's rest. We enter his rest only by believing the good news of Yeshua, by pitching our tents with him and looking for him to teach us how he pitches his tent with us. By using the term Sabbath rest, he's indicating that this is what Shabbat points to, just like the bronze serpent in the desert pointed to Yeshua's crucifixion, and the washings pointed to forgiveness, and the sacrifices pointed to Yeshua. Similarly, the weekly Shabbat points to our entering his rest. Now, back to Hebrews verse 10, we read, "For he who has entered into Elohim's rest also has ceased from the weariness and pain of human labors, just as Elohim rested from those labors which were peculiarly his own." Verse 11, "Let us therefore, since entering his rest means that we don't focus on laboring and work in the world. Therefore, let us therefore do our utmost and strive diligently to enter his rest, the rest of Elohim, to know and experience it for ourselves, that no one may fall or perish by the same kind of unbelief and disobedience into which those in the wilderness fell." Now finally, verses 12 through 16 talk to us about holding fast to our confessions to Yeshua, the bane of Yahweh, our Kohen HaGadol, our high priest, who has passed through the Shamayim and who was tried in all respects just as we are, but he apart from any sin, failings, or shortcomings of any kind. In other words, we continually exercise 1 John 1:9. We pray to Abba Father and confess our failings and shortcomings so that he cleanses us and forgives us through Yeshua continually. And why should we be so diligent to enter into his rest? Because no one is hidden from his sight. He knows about every one of our failings. His word contains both promise and command, and it calls for our response to it. If we're not talking to him about our shortcomings every day, then we're not pitching our tent with him, and he is fully aware of that. In verse 16 we read, "Let us then fearlessly, confidently, and boldly draw near to the throne of grace," the throne from whence Elohim pitches his tent with us, that we may receive his compassion for our failures and find his forgiveness and favor for perfectly timed help coming just when we need it. Now, the word we see as rest in Psalm 95:11 is an English translation of the original Aramaic Hebrew word menucha. Menucha comes from Strong's number H4496 and is spelled Mem Nun Wa Chet He. Mem, picture of water, has to do with the word, and it has to do with the blood of Yeshua. Nun, picture of a seed, has to do in this case with the good seed, with unstoppable motion, and it has to do with offsprings and heirs. Then we have Wa, picture of a tent peg, pitch your tent with Elohim. And then we have Chet, picture of a fence. It divides, separates people from the world into Elohim's Malchut, kingdom. The fence surrounds and protects those. It has to do, Chet has to do with the resurrection, the Net Chetef, the rapture, and with the operation of the gifts of the Ruach. And then finally, we have He, picture of a spiritual man with his arms raised, saying, "Behold." He also has to do with revelation and with the fifth dimension of Ruach, spirit. So, to enter into or to be in his rest, his menucha, means to be a believer in Yeshua, saved and purchased by his blood, to be growing in and washed by the word regularly, daily, to be one who is of the good seed, an offspring and an heir of Yeshua. To be in his rest is to be one who is pitching their tent daily with Elohim, and whom Elohim is pitching his tent with. To be in his menucha is to be fenced in by him, divided, separated from the world, protected and surrounded by his Gader HaKodesh, his hedge of protection, operating in the gifts and the fruit of his Ruach. And it places those who are in his menucha in the resurrection, the Net Chetef, the rapture. Those who are praising him with their arms raised, receiving revelation from him through his indwelling presence. We want to enter into Elohim's rest. To be in his rest is to be one of the Kodeshim, those who are dedicated to him, to Elohim, and no one and nothing else. To be in his rest, his menucha, is you don't find yourself struggling with work. You're resting. I could go on and on about that one. My work is not work. It's pleasure. It's joyful. And when we enter into his rest, whatever you do as work is not going to be troublesome. It's not going to be something that you hate doing. Why? Because you're trusting in him. You know, when you're when you're pitching your tent with Elohim, when you're making him number one on a list of one in your life, when you're trusting him about everything, especially because you're talking to him about everything every day, what might normally be something that you have a distaste for doing, you could be doing that same thing and not have a distaste for it, because you've entered into his rest, because you have his berakah, his blessing on you about it, because you're being washed by and growing in his word. You're looking at things differently. And so it's not a misery as it would be otherwise. People who aren't growing in his word, people who aren't being washed by his word, are not receiving the renewing of their minds. They have a tendency to complain about everything because they can't get everything to succumb to their own will. And you know, that kind of a mindset is like trying to be your own God. You want to like control the world and everybody in it, and you can't. And then people become angry and breaks their immune system down. They become sick. Everything just goes awry. But to enter into his rest first is done by being in his word, getting to know him. The more you're in his word, the more you get to know him. The more you get to know him, the more you trust him. The more you trust him, the more you find out that you can. So, you know, entering into his rest, into his menucha, means to receive his anointing, to become one of the Kodeshim, to have his hedge of protection, his Geder HaKodesh around you, to have more shalom, more peace about everything because you're looking at things differently. You're looking at things through his eyes instead of through the eyes of the world. That's really what it comes down to. And that's our study for this week, my friends. As always, I hope and I pray that this study is a beracha to you and yours. Abba willing, I'll see you here again next week. And until then, shalom, my friends. Yeah. Now 2,000 years have gone by, it's another working day. Some would rather let it lie, but the question still remains.